Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and guests, welcome back to Day 3 of the Middle East Institute's Annual Conference 2021, entitled Meeting the Future Together, Opportunities and Challenges for the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East. Thus far, we have covered the themes of trade and technology on Day 1 and Day 2, respectively. Our third and final installment today will examine human capital development, of which education and training are imperative strategies to keep up with evolving economic and social trends. Before we delve into today's subject matter, please allow me to summarize the events on the first 2 days of this conference. On Day 1, Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean and Minister Tan See Leng shared optimism about the potential to deepen economic engagement between the Middle East and Asia, following which the first panel explored the range of economic opportunities for inter-regional collaboration. On Day 2, yesterday, Minister Vivian Balakrishnan stressed the importance of leveraging digitalization, which the second panel further dissected into the complexities of cybersecurity, aspects of smart or sustainable cities, and finally, the disruptive, if not dark side of technology. The intertwined nature of the topics discussed so far is perhaps best expressed by comments from one of the panelists yesterday, who said that students should develop an early multidisciplinary understanding of technology. This remark provides an apt transition to today's panel, entitled Human Capital Development, Building Resilience Through Education and Training. Before the discussion begins, let us now watch the recorded keynote speech delivered by Mr. Lawrence Wong, Minister for Education and Second Minister for Finance.
Mr. Bilahari Kausikan, Chairman of the Middle East Institute, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to join you for this virtual MEI conference. COVID-19 has upended our way of life, including the way we interact and socialize with one another. It has also intensified and accelerated many large-scale economic and societal trends. The pandemic has brought much of industry and commerce to a standstill, and it has changed the way we live, work, and play. Beyond the immediate disruptions to our economy and society, the pandemic has also underscored the importance of education in preparing our students to face a rapidly changing future. The fact is that knowledge is increasing at an exponential rate. For example, in 1950, it took about 50 years for knowledge in medicine to double. By 1980, medical knowledge was doubling every 7 years. By 2010, it was doubling in half that time. And that's one of the reasons why we have been able to roll out vaccines so quickly to fight the virus. With this rapid increase in knowledge, today's young are likely to have multiple job changes through their lifetimes. Look at the top jobs on LinkedIn today. Jobs like being an iOS or Android developer, a UX designer, cloud manager, big data architect. These jobs didn't exist 10 years ago. So our youths are likely to be doing jobs in the future that don't exist now, and we must prepare them well for such a future. It is therefore fitting that the theme of this session is on human capital development and how we can build resilience through education and training. So let me share some of our thoughts. First, we must prepare our people to continually rethink and relearn. We traditionally think of cognitive strength as the ability to think and learn. But in a turbulent world, there is another set of cognitive skills that matter, and that's the ability to rethink, to unlearn things that we may already know because the knowledge is outdated and to relearn. This requires agility and nimbleness of mind, as well as the humility to listen to others and to stay open to new ideas, and then continually update our thinking as circumstances change. Now, I know this may seem like a very straightforward matter, but rethinking and retooling is a skill set that needs to be constantly practiced. And the irony is that sometimes the more successful we are, the more difficult it is to change. Take an example that all of us are familiar with, the handphone BlackBerry. It was very popular, and at its peak, it accounted for about half of the US smartphone market. It was a major innovation for its time with its keyboard and its very usable interface. BlackBerry developed something that was convenient and met user needs at that time. Then the first iPhone entered the market in 2007. But the founder of BlackBerry didn't want to change and stuck to its original model, and it failed to adapt. And we all know what has happened to BlackBerry today. In Singapore, over the past year of fighting this pandemic, we've also had to continually update our way of thinking. We've had experience dealing with a coronavirus, SARS, some years back. But SARS-CoV-2 is a completely new virus. So what worked well for us previously in the SARS outbreak was not so effective for this new virus. For example, with SARS, the person who became infectious only after symptoms like fever were set in, so it was easier to detect such an infectious person. This time, the virus spreads much faster, well before the onset of symptoms, and there are also asymptomatic transmissions. So we had to completely overhaul our contact tracing system with the help of technology. And through that process, we are today able to move faster to identify close contacts of an infected person and put them on quarantine so as to prevent the virus from spreading into large clusters. So these examples illustrate the importance of nimbleness and flexibility to keep on updating our way of thinking with new knowledge and with the development of new information. Second, as our students progress in their education journey, it is crucial that they not only develop deep expertise in their chosen fields, but also the ability to think laterally, to make sense of complex information by drawing connections across different domains. Indeed, real-world problems are often ambiguous and complex. The solutions often do not fall neatly within one box, and the best and most creative solutions often come from the cross-fertilization of ideas across different schools of thought, or even from completely different disciplines. And that's why we are encouraging our institutes of higher learning to make interdisciplinary learning an integral part of their teaching and learning. We recognize that education is not just about filling the student with content and knowledge. It is far more important to train them how to think and learn and to enjoy doing so. So we are giving students greater flexibility to choose courses they enjoy and to pick up skills across different disciplines before they decide on the specific domains they wish to dive deeper into. So that's our second sort of a priority, to be able to broaden the skills and competencies of every student. Third, we have to do more to help every individual achieve their fullest potential, especially those from more disadvantaged backgrounds. The impact of COVID-19 is felt disproportionately by the poor and vulnerable groups everywhere in the world. We know that the virus has brought about school closures in many countries, and this impacts all children, but those from poor and vulnerable families are often impacted the most. And these are the findings in many countries where they have done research and surveys, and they show that after the lockdown and school closures, the gap in exam scores between a typical student and those in more difficult circumstances would widen. We've had a similar experience in Singapore, although not to the same extent. because we have tried our best to avoid school closures. But last year, we've had 1 month of full home-based learning. In that process, we found that some children thrived and they enjoyed the newfound freedom of learning from home. But those who do not have a conducive and home environment did find it difficult to cope. That's why we are doing more in schools to support these students. We are providing the schools with more resources so that they are able to provide additional support for their students. This would include learning support in smaller pull-out classes. And beyond academic support, we are giving them exposure to different activities and programs, including public speaking, learning journeys, and overseas trips. We are also deploying more allied educators, counselors, and welfare officers to support our students, especially those with special needs. Beyond school-based support, we are going upstream because we know from research that early interventions can make a big difference in a child's development. And so we are investing significantly in preschool to give every child an affordable and quality preschool education. We are also investing in R&D to better understand how children develop, how their brains develop, and how they learn. And we're looking at the earliest years of childhood, even at the prenatal stage, where the well-being of a pregnant mother can have lasting effects on a child's development. And we are setting up a new Science of Learning in Education Center at our National Institute of Education, where we bring together multidisciplinary teams to drive research and translational work to better understand how people learn. And we hope all of this research and development efforts will allow us to design more meaningful and impactful interventions to bring out the best in every child. Finally, we are pushing for a mindset change in society to embrace lifelong learning. We are making fundamental shifts in our model of education. We don't want to front-load learning when a person is young or treat education simply as a conveyor belt for the job market. Instead, we want a system of education for life, and that's why we've embarked on a national movement which we call Skills Future, where everyone can reskill, upgrade, and continuously improve through life to be the best version of themselves. Employers play an important role in this regard. A lot of on-the-job training at work today is done in an ad hoc manner. So we are supporting employers and strengthening their capabilities to deliver better quality training at the workplace. For example, we are setting up national centers of excellence for workplace learning, where we aim to reduce the barriers to upskilling at the workplace through in-house training systems, as well as better support for workplace trainers. Besides learning in a work context, we also want to encourage individuals' intrinsic motivations to learn for life, to see learning not as a means to enable work, but as a lifelong habit and an integral way of life. And we have empowered every adult Singaporean with Skills Future credits, which they can use for a wide range of courses. And we want every individual to take ownership and responsibility for their skills journey. We have seen some early success, but we still have a long way to go. And we eventually hope to build a broad culture of lifelong learning in Singapore, a culture where learning is valued for the joy and the sense of fulfillment that it brings, and is deeply entrenched in the social fabric. It becomes an intrinsic part of daily life for Singaporeans of all ages. To conclude, education and training is something that Singapore takes very seriously because people are our only and greatest resource. Ultimately, our ability as a nation to remain resilient and to make the best of the future is dependent on our ability and the ability of our people to have the spirit and the means to continually reinvent ourselves. It is with this in mind that we are constantly reviewing and updating our education and training ecosystem to better prepare every individual to navigate a world of change with confidence. I have shared some thoughts on what we are doing in Singapore. We are happy to share our experiences and also to hear what others have done so that we can continue to learn and improve. In this regard, I wish you all a fruitful panel discussion and look forward to your ideas on how both the Middle East and Singapore can continue to do better in this space. Thank you very much.
On behalf of MEI and our audience, please allow me to extend our warmest gratitude to Minister Wong for his address. Holistic and lifelong learning, as underscored by the Minister, remain embedded in Singapore's vision to cultivate a nimble and competitive workforce. The notion of a demographic dividend, where the youth can shift a country's economic growth potential, is relevant to the Middle East as it is to Asia. The key points shared by Minister Wong will serve today's panel well. We will now proceed to our third and last panel for this conference, moderated by Professor Tan Eng Chai, President of the National University of Singapore. Professor Tan is the university's 5th president and the 23rd leader of Singapore's oldest education institution. Before the discussion begins, may I remind our audience that during the Q&A segment, you may enter your questions in the Q&A function on Zoom. Let me now hand it over to Professor Tan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clemens. Allow me to bring up my presentation. Good afternoon. I'm really honored to be the moderator of this third panel of the MEI Middle East Institutes Conference 2021. This panel comprised of 5 very distinguished colleagues, and I'm pleased to just briefly introduce them. We have Professor Abdullah Babut, visiting professor, School of International Liberal Studies at Waseda University, and also a research chair in Islamic Area Studies. He has been a visiting scholar at the Middle East Institute, as well as in several universities in Qatar, in Cambridge, and we are really pleased to have him on this panel. Professor Abdullah's teaching and research interest focuses on international relations, international political economy, especially on globalization and regionalization. Next on our panel members is Professor Brian Smith, Vice Chancellor and President, Australian National University. He is also the 2011 Nobel Prize winner or Nobel laureate in physics. He is an sort of astrophysicist, and he has been with several institutions, and notably the ANU Mount Stromlo Observatory, as well as the Research School of Astronomy and Astrophysics, before becoming Vice Chancellor. And Professor Smith has been Vice Chancellor of ANU since 2016. We are really delighted to have him on this panel. The third panel member, which I'd like to introduce, is Professor Gildo Asaraku, Rector of the Polytechnico di Torino, or Polytechnic University of Turin. He is also President of the Commission for Strategies for Development. He is a very strong material and nanoscientist, and he has been also representing the university in several research groupings in Europe and elsewhere. He's also a member of the Bioenergy Education Group for drawing up the set plan in the energy sector of the European Community for the H2020 program. Really glad to have Professor Asaraku with us. Our fourth member is Professor Mariette Westerman, the Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive of New York University at Abu Dhabi. She was in fact, the founding provost of NYU Abu Dhabi. And prior to that, she has served as executive vice president of the Andrew Mellon Foundation. She is an art historian, and she has authored numerous scholarly and museum publications, including the widely read A Worldly Art, the Dutch Republic, 1585 to 1718. And of course, curated several exhibitions, notably Art and Home and similar exhibitions elsewhere. We are certainly very delighted to have Professor Westerman to be a part of this panel. The fifth member is a good friend of mine, Mr. Shigeo Katsu, president of Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. He has been president for more than 10 years, since December 2010. And prior to Nazarbayev University, in fact, over a course of 30 years, he has been at the World Bank and has held various positions, including leading financial sector reform support for China, director for the Code Ivoire, and vice president for Europe and Central Asia. Thank you, Mr. Katsu, for joining us. Let me just briefly highlight some of the key points that we will want to discuss in this panel. If you look at Africa, by projection, Africa's population will double from about 1.3 billion to 2.8 billion by 2050. And Middle East is a very young region. In fact, those between the ages of 15 to 35 make up about 1/3, or about 34% of the region's population. But being developing, many African and Middle Eastern nations also have to grapple with youth underemployment and also a large informal economic sector. Now, there has been, in the last 10 years, interest in Asia and also in Asian universities. One, of course, is Asia's rapid growth and development has drawn interest. Notably, countries like India and China has been growing extremely fast and making a very important economic impact in the world. And some nations, such as Japan and South Korea, they have rose from conflict to become first world countries. And these are actually very excellent examples or models for many countries to look up to. Let me just finish with the last slide. So I'd like to highlight some of the recognizable characteristics in Asia. One, of course, is the massification of access to higher education, and at the same time, upholding meritocracy. There is actually quite a strong emphasis on subject and domain mastery. And this is helped because there's strong foundation of primary and secondary education. And particularly in many countries, they do well in the area of STEM education. Now, there are also very strategic partnerships across Asia. NYE Abu Dhabi is one excellent example. NYU Shanghai, Xiamen University in Malaysia, and at NUS, we have Duke NUS and Yale NUS as example of strategic partnerships. And in a lot of these partnerships, not forgetting other sort of practices, adapting best ideas and practices and localizing them to the local context. It's very useful and it works. There's constant innovation, especially with emerging and new fields, including AI, robotics, IoT, material science. There's also constant experimentation in terms of new modes of learning, experiential learning, interdisciplinary learning, entrepreneurial learning, and work-study programs, just to name a few. But it's not without challenge because it is largely a very complex issue. There are major challenges. And you have heard our Minister for Education, Mr. Lawrence Wong, actually articulating some of these challenges, right? And the challenges would include declining birth rate, graduate underemployment, and our minister talks quite a bit about pivoting to lifelong education, and he alluded to also closer collaboration with industry as some examples of challenges are facing our universities. So this is the preamble which I'd like to share, and it's my great pleasure to invite the first member of the panel, Professor Abdullah Mahmood, to provide his sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tan, for this kind introduction and illuminating concepts that you have brought in. And also, I follow with also the introduction of the Minister Lawrence Wong, that have actually provided quite a great backdrop to the session today. I also want to thank my colleagues and friends at MEI for inviting me to take part in this very important annual conference, and especially in this very important session with very distinguished speakers. I think it goes without saying, and it has been already mentioned, that there is no development that can take place in any country without education. And as we know that education and human resource is one of the most important factors of productions. Without highly educated, highly trained human capital, it's going to be difficult to have sustainable economic development. So in every sense, there is, the fundamental factor is education of your human capital. As we know, education enriches people and also enriches their understanding, enriches their knowledge of their environment, and also the world at large. As well as it improves the quality of their lives and broadens their social benefits to both individuals and society. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new here because most of you are involved and providing education, so you know more about this than I do. But you also know that education improves the quality of life and the ability of people to not only to enhance their economic and welfare and well-being, but also to create a much healthier environment, as we are witnessing now with the COVID-19 and its effect on the global healthcare system and the economy. So education in every part plays a very important part of in security of the economic development and the resilience of that economic development and its social progress, and it improves income distribution and welfare of the human being. Without education, as I said earlier, and as many of you would know, it's going to be very hard to have a sustainable economic development. Asia has recognized this from day one. Asian economic model did not rest upon the natural resources as perhaps some of the Middle Eastern countries, even some African countries, have done. Development took place in Asia and the Middle East almost at the same time. And we have now witnessing, or we are witnessing, the Asian century, the Asian miracle. While in the Middle East, we are really seeing the opposite in many ways, with few exceptions, of course. Asia and Asian countries have recognized the importance of education and training and long life learning, and invested heavily on this, and created an education hub that is been at the center of international education. And we have now seen that Asian universities, Asian education system have become an example, even for the United States, to think of creating some strategic partnership with Asian universities, and to a certain extent neglecting Europe, was in itself an indication of how Asian education in Asia is developing, and how Asian universities have come to the forefront of education. We have seen almost a regional supremacy here in improving, the campuses in terms of, competition between them, as Professor Tan had mentioned, and the minister, inviting international renowned universities to partner with them. They basically fast-tracked the development in education by importing best practices from the best universities in the world, and also creating strategic partnerships with them. But having said that, we have to remember that Asian universities did not just rely on higher education, as has also been mentioned previously. They have managed to establish the foundation of the intakes of this university. So we see that Asian schools do very well in terms of global ranking, not only their universities, but their schools, in terms of the program for international student assessment, PISA. We see some of the best schools in Asia are doing extremely well. So no wonder why America calls it, call Asia as the American Pacific century. Having said that, and having seen the success of Asian education and equipping their human resource with the right skills in education and life learning and relearning and retraining, we've seen how this how this has impacted on their economic development and the welfare of their societies. If you compare this to the Middle East, the development trajectory took a completely different route. Obviously, there are some exceptions, as always. But the general rule is that in the Middle East and the Gulf in particular, they were blessed with oil resources, gas resources, hydrocarbon resources. And therefore, the need for high-skilled human capital to lead the development wasn't really there as much as it was in Asia. The reliance or the over-reliance on the economies of the Middle Eastern states and the oil-producing states in particular on income from oil has created a certain culture of distribution of this income rather than actually creating the wealth themselves. So it has become a culture of wealth distribution, making sure that it is distributed across the societies, etc. So in a sense, this has created a rentier state, a rentier economy, but also a rentier psychology and a rentier culture. And that culture basically transformed from not just economic and state but also to the way that they viewed education. Education wasn't viewed as it was in Asia, that this is one of the tools for economic development and one of the factors of production, but it was viewed as this is something extra. Perhaps we need to educate our people to be civil servants, to get a job in the government. Government was the provider of employment and not the private sector. So the whole aim initially was built on producing basically civil servants. Obviously, that has changed over time, and some exceptions have taken place. We have seen, particularly in countries like Saudi Arabia, but more in UAE and Qatar, they have been able to partner with and invite some top-notch universities from across the world to learn from them, but also to set up overseas campuses there and help with their education system. However, just setting up the campus or bringing in international universities and international name by itself is not enough in many respects. It does help, of course, but it's the culture that I refer to, this rentier culture and rentier psychology, that people still rely on the government to feed them, to give them jobs. The whole concept of the rentier state and the rentier economy and the welfare state. So this is something that has actually affected the quality of work. Now, there are, of course, exceptions and there are successes, and I'm sure many of my colleagues will mention that. But I think while in Asia, not only the economic need, but also the culture of the Confucian culture has helped to instill values and instill norms in the people that they need to take part in the development of their countries. In the Middle East is not the same. It's different. The culture is still very much reliant on government funding and government spending and government jobs. And that will take some time to change, despite all the investment that has taken place in the Middle East in education. I think there is future for cooperation and for lessons to be learned. And I have been asked to wrap up, so I will just say that we can maybe bring some of these issues in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mahmood. I think you made a very important point on the culture and on that distribution of wealth instead of income generation. Let me invite the second speaker, Professor Brian Smith, Vice Chancellor and President of ANU, to give his remarks. Professor Smith, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Angqi. And thank you, everyone, for coming along, whatever time zone you're in, the evening here in Australia. So we've heard a lot about the importance of education, and I'm not going to talk so much about that. I want to talk about I think some of the ways that we need to think beyond just the education and the extra things that come along with it. Because in the years to come, developing human capital will be even more important in the Middle East as the traditional exports of oil and gas are phased out, as we've just heard. And what I see is that education that is international in character pays particularly strong dividends in our globalized world, because so much trade and commerce and things that make a society prosper are actually based on relationships when it comes to, as I said, foreign investment, cooperation in research, trade, and government and business sectors getting along and doing things. So ideally, all states will have strong universities themselves, and not just a single university, but a system. And they will attract domestic international students and faculty. But the reality, as we've seen in Asia or even Australia, such institutions take a lot of money and time to build. They take decades of investment. They require, for a nation, long-term stability. And if they want to be international, they have to have a working environment during that time that is ultimately acceptable to the international staff and students who are going to be part of the institutions. If we look to Asia, and I'll include Oceania, my part of the world, since I'm on the panel, it's part of Asia. If you look after World War II, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand all started a long-term investment in research universities. These did not really exist, a little bit in Japan, but definitely not in Australia and New Zealand until after World War II. Since the 1970s and 80s, Singapore, Korea, and China all started large-scale investments. And of course, these things now, 40 years later, have yielded very strong internationally recognized university systems. And when I look into ASEAN, most Asian countries now have at least one international university, but it's typically not a strong research university and is not really part of a system. And it is interesting to see that of all the countries of Asia and Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore remain the most international with respect to staff and student bodies. And I suspect that's largely because we're fortunate to have English as a primary language, which is the lingua franca of academia worldwide. Not terribly fair, but it's just the fact of the way the world is right now. So for the Middle East, as part of that long-term desire to, I think, develop endemic capacity for their large and growing populations, it will be important not just to get educated as fast and cheaply as possible. You want to create a sustaining system that actually brings the prosperity rather than just the first order prosperity, but all the spillovers that come with it. And so it is easy to shortcut some of the development by working with more developed educational systems. Because if you're able to go through and start educating the students today at a very high level, they get that high set of training, and that allows them to come back and be, for example, future faculty in universities, but also captains of industry and government along the way. The international education market has become globally very competitive because it is so lucrative for both the host countries. And if I look at Australia in 2019, higher education was 2.5% of our gross domestic product. And it was our third largest export behind iron ore and coal, noting that Australia, like the Middle East, is very commodity driven. But it's also really important for the development of human capital and the economy in nations with undereducated populations. So there really is a win-win here. And I think that's why tonight talking about the chance of the Middle East sort of accelerating their education with the cooperation of Asian economies. If we look right now, the USA has been a strong traditional market for the Middle East. Its huge university education system, very generously trained students at the graduate level, usually paid for by the USA if it's at the research level. But then in return, it scoops many of the most talented And they end up becoming the next generation of entrepreneurs, researchers, and business leaders. And of course, they connect to a lot of the capital that is in the Middle East in the form of, big foundations and companies. The US and also the UK also serve as a very large market for fee-paying students. And students right now are prepared to pay a premium for the Education USA product compared to any other market, including Asia. And in my opinion, you overpay going to the US compared to what you're going to get in Asia. And that's the benefit of having a premium market. And I do note that many financial and business activities that occur both in the Middle East and the US have been built on these relationships formed by students in their time overseas. So even at the high fee rate for many students, that is a really good thing to do. But as the economy of the world becomes less centered on the US, the UK, and Europe, with more and more activity in the Middle East and Asia, which many of those countries are more proximate, and so there are some real benefits, it will be of substantial mutual benefit for the countries of the Middle East and Asia to further diversify their own relationships to include each other, because Asia is also tending to look very much to those same countries. Education, and is what I've found, is a key pillar to building these overall economic relationships. But it has to be a system-wide approach to be effective if you want to get those spillovers. And those spillovers are what really speed the whole system up. So what do I mean by a system? The additional flow-on benefits of education will be improved if they're underpinned by other educational and government interventions. So yes, Asian universities can offer scholarships to entice the best students, but this needs to be underpinned by a sensible immigration follow-on work rights, foreign investment opportunities, research opportunities, technology opportunities for those students, as well as an underpinning innovation and industry policy that supports all of that, and lots of two-way exchange of people. If you just get the education, you're really missing on the follow-on effects. So in Australia, and I'll give an example here, if you receive an offer to study in Australia, we have some scholarships, not a lot, not nearly as many as, for example, the US, for example, but you do get some perks. You get work rights while you study. If you have a family, they can usually come along and work with you as well. And after you finish your degree, you can typically stay on and work for several years, and sometimes indefinitely. Australia is relatively open to foreign investment, but maybe a little less so in the past few years. But it suffers from a poor and continually changing research, technology, and innovation industry policy, which means it's hard to become an entrepreneur and start building those business relationships and then bring them back home. In total, Australia does actually set up a large amount of value add to the country from its international students, well beyond just the headline figures of dollars spent in the country by students and the fees they pay. And indeed, it has led to a significant amount of foreign investment and trade with our neighbors, typically from Asia, that study in Australia. It has been literally a goose that has laid many golden eggs for the country over the last 2 decades, but I'm afraid it is one that has lost its shine during the pandemic. And so there's a huge opportunity for other countries to come in and I think learn from some of the smart things that Australia has done. The USA, on the other hand, has a wide variety of scholarships, more than Australia, but much poorer work rights or family rights associated with study, which are a real disincentive for many. Foreign investment is highly incentivized in most incidents, and by a highly stable and developed research technology and industry policy. And so in that sense, the US is incredibly effective at extracting value from its study programs. It does less on direct trade with countries, but rather it builds up its own technology industry sector. And it doesn't do that in a direct way as in Australia, but in a more indirect way. It's just bringing people in as part of the system. The UK and Canada, I think, are somewhere between Australia and the USA, with Europe fairly unwelcoming to students right now, staying or working well in country by and large, and the language difficulties there remain a real barrier. So there's not a huge amount going on. So there are huge opportunities for the Middle East looking to Asia for upskilling, but the big mutual gains come from, in my opinion, putting a whole of relationship system around it. And I can tell you that here in Australia and at ANU, this is a priority for us at present, because we really do see the upsides. And so I think I'm usually a good indicator of things that are sensible to do. I try not to do too many stupid things. And for me, as I said, it is genuinely a big opportunity going forward. So I look forward to talking to you all in the Q&A session. Thank you, Ang-Chi.
Thank you very much, Professor Schmidt. I took away two very excellent points. One is the international character of higher education. And two, it is important that whatever policies that you have, it must be underpinned by other educational as well as government intervention. And thanks very much for your advice that if Middle Eastern countries are looking to Asia for help in this particular aspect, then they should look at the whole of the relationship ecosystem in order to reap the full benefits from it. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to invite Professor Gildo Asaraku, Rector of the Polytechnic University of Turin. Professor Asaraku, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very exciting workshop. I'm going to share some slides with you to accompany my presentation. I'm going to start from what one of our recent honoris causa graduates that by chance was also a Nobel Prize of Economics in 2001, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, says, in times of profound crisis, the economy and in politics, non-profit organizations like universities are the only social actors to be able to make a change towards a sustainable trajectory. Actually, we feel this is quite true in this moment of economic crisis, and especially after this tremendous hit by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In order to provide an impact on society, we are changing the way we are designing our education, research, and technology transfer trajectories, moving away from an academia that was separate from business, from politics, from administration and business. The model that we have been following for about 160 years since we were created was to prepare graduates and to provide research results to industry that had to take them with a sort of good quality from us, but then tailor them to their own requirements. This kind of graduates look for multinational companies and is not sensible to the small medium enterprises that are in our country, Italy, 95% of our companies. So this model is now off, and we are changing towards a sort of co-design of our education, research, and technology transfer trajectories. This reduces a bit our independence to some extent, but if we don't do this, we are going to prepare people that are not fit for what is needed in a society that has changed a lot. Changed a lot due maybe also to the technology that we have been developing. Technology is now dramatically changing the society, changing the jobs, creating diseases that new technologies are going to cure. And for this reason, we have been elaborating a significantly different strategic plan that is aimed for impact. So we are going to target impact on society directly as a measure and monitor it as a measure of what we are doing in the university. This is a really radical change. What we are going to create, what we are creating in our town, Torino, that was sort of town dominated by Fiat car manufacturing companies, according to a Ford model, something like that. So we were about 1.2 million in the 70s, and now we are a population that decreases because there is no more this big industry, and we have to recreate ourselves in some direction. We are creating areas in the town where we are concentrating the education, research, innovation, and other services that come from public bodies side by side with large enterprises, small, medium enterprise, startups from our incubator, and hubs from industrial association unions, in order to create what is called in Europe a knowledge and innovation community. This is also a physical side of our town. You see here, this is a map of Torino. We are creating this in former industrial sites that are less populated, unfortunately, than it used to be. We have created a sort of town for the aerospace, a town for agriculture 4.0, let's say, a town for manufacturing 4.0 and sustainable mobility, a health region of our town with a big hospital, with the departments of medicine and biomedical engineering and research facilities, and attraction of health-related companies, and a town here on circular economy and energy transition. The Polytechnic di Torino main site is here with all the departments, but we are transferring in all these areas the specific research activities and technology transfer activities, the startups that are in line with the theme of these small towns. We call them small towns. In order to tailor the requirements of our society and the companies, we are innovating the way we are teaching. We are changing our engineering courses dramatically by spurring creativity to our engineers, and by inserting human and social sciences as a tool to understand society, to understand the effect of technologies on society, to understand the problems of society in order to invent new technologies. This is a very significant change. We have launched programs on the big challenges of our society, health, climate change, energy transition, a new mobility, that already in the bachelor courses are faced by interdisciplinary teams of students with different areas in the technology portfolio of ours, architecture, engineering, design, urban planning, that work together, assisted by two mentors, one coming from the technology area, one coming from the human and social sciences area. Maybe we're going to speculate more later on this. And we are looking for having learning by doing. These teams are also in the master courses, are creating new things that were not there together. And this shortens the transition to graduation and the transition to direct employment and effective employment, because this is the way companies are creating innovation nowadays. We are coming to Asia, and what we are doing in Asia, We have one of the best technical university in the Middle Asia. In Tashkent, we have created the Turin Polytechnic University, where we are transferring some of our beautiful brands. Juventus Team Academy also came there as a part of Torino, but we are delivering our engineering courses and some of our master courses. And we have also laboratories there where the people are learning by doing as it is done. This is the entire portfolio of things we're doing, and we are trying to transfer the models that we are applying to our society to Tashkent. And let me tell you, one thing that is very important is the professional education, to create not just engineer, but in this case specialized technicians for the digital transition of the industry. This is something that is needed everywhere, and we can apply it also in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan. Because companies do not just need engineers, but they need also these specialized technicians. This is a completely different learning scheme. Is basically the Fachhochschulen German model that is now applied in Italy also through our efforts, and possibly we're trying also to apply that in Tashkent. Unfortunately, the COVID has turned everything into virtual, but we look forward to get back to Tashkent with all our professors. Basically, 50 of our professors moved from Torino to Tashkent to have their courses there. Uzbekistan, as everything along the One Belt, One Road initiative is moving fast. We would like to bring a bit of Europe, a bit of Italy, and our companies to contribute to this perspective. So thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to share these views with you, and I'm looking forward to your questions later on.
Thank you, Professor Asaraku. I think that the call for universities to change because the external environment has been changing. I think it's actually well hit. And thanks for sharing the public and private partnerships that your university had for social impact. Very impressive. And also the innovations in your teaching and learning to include multidisciplinarity as well as experiential learning. And we are delighted to hear about your venture, all right, in Tashkent. All right, look forward to visit it one day. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Next, I think we are delighted to have Professor Westerman, Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive Officer of NYU at Abu Dhabi. Professor Westerman, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Tan, for the kind introductions and for inviting me to participate in this important discussion. And thank you all, fellow panelists, for your extraordinary remarks. I look forward to visiting every one of your universities, in fact. Amazing work. Before I comment on human capital development in Asia and the Middle East, North Africa, I'll describe what I may bring to the conversation. I am most familiar with higher education in North America, Europe, and the MENA region, and less so with Asia. Though at New York University, Abu Dhabi, we have many students from across the continent, and they do very well. NYU AD, as we call it for short, NYU AD is one of 3 full degree granting campuses of New York University. The mothership in New York, a somewhat smaller campus than ours in Shanghai, and us. And we therefore keep a close eye on the extraordinary educational developments in Asia, and are fortunate to have a great partner in NYU Shanghai, as well as a friendly competitor in Yale and NUS. Like Yale and NUS, NYU AD has at its core a liberal arts college in the American tradition, but it is decentered out of the Western tradition. We opened in 2010 and are of intimate size by design, but still growing. Our 1,700 or so students today come from 120 countries, with about 18% coming from the UAE. Our undergraduates develop depth and expertise in their majors, but they also take a broad suite of courses for breadth, perspective, and intercultural understanding of the kind that Minister Wong spoke about. Our research enterprise is outsized. It's very large for a liberal arts college, our size, because it is driven collaboratively between our faculty in Abu Dhabi and our faculty in New York. And that research heft in all disciplines is also spurring the development of our master's and PhD programs in the sciences, engineering, social sciences, humanities, and the arts. So now to the question at hand. How can higher education systems in the Middle East and Asia deliver on the huge potential of the region's youth benefit that President Tan sketched for us? The key to diversification of the economy and to human flourishing in any societies is education. K through 12 schooling, university education, and lifelong learning and upskilling. For pathways into the knowledge economy, a robust system of higher education is especially important. Though for those systems to be strong, many countries around the world also need to widen the pathways from secondary into tertiary education. Too often, I feel, the funnel between high school and higher education has become too narrow. In the US, for example, many schools are failing to graduate enough students, high school students, a problem that is deeply tied to all forms of inequality. In Europe and in Asia, students are forced at the age of 16 sometimes, or younger even, to specialize in subjects that are prerequisite for certain careers, especially in medicine, science, and technology. Now, the science of human development and psychology actually tells us that most young people don't fully develop their brain capacities, especially the frontal lobe, or their sense of purpose until they reach their early 20s. And often by then, education pathways have been foreclosed by our own systems of education. This is an old problem, but in an era of accelerating world challenges, lengthening lifetimes, and rapid technological change, this seems a weakness. It seems a weakness to constrain our greatest resource, people's talents and appetites, at a young age. Exclusive focus on the first job after graduation or a 5-year economic forecast only will preclude the ability of the next generations to adapt to a landscape of jobs we cannot fully envision, again, as Minister Wong said so powerfully. The only thing we know is that most people entering the workforce now will have to keep learning and will probably have to change jobs or entire fields of human endeavor at least once in their career, and probably more often, if they are to flourish and to be optimal contributors to their societies. How are the Gulf nations, which are the ones I will focus on, responding to these realities? In the past 2 decades, higher education in the Arab Peninsula has seen remarkable growth and diversification, as Professor Abdullah indicated, even if there are some persistent gaps to be addressed. I will take the UAE as an example, but much of what I will say applies to the wider Middle East. So the UAE was founded 50 years ago this year, and one of its great accomplishments has been the establishment of a modern and ambitious system of higher learning out of basically nothing. The country has a population of about 10 million, including citizens and residents from 200 countries. And relative to that size of population, the system is quite large now. There are some 160,000 or more students in tertiary education in the UAE at the last count that I know, 2018. And that number is double what it was in 2007. It grew very fast in this century. And some 12,000 additional Emirati students, mostly male, but not only, go abroad for university study, including in your countries, though primarily points west. The percentage of young people in higher education does appear to be very high. And as in other countries, it is especially high among women, disproportionately high among women. The growing numbers of students point then to the effective ways in which the UAE has created a culture of expectation that higher education is essential to success in life, to contributions to society, and to the future of the UAE, which the people here really care about. I think that rulers across the Arab Peninsula and this speaks to Professor Abdullah's point about culture, I think. Across the peninsula are now emphasizing the importance of education in highly intentional ways. Young Emiratis understand that their leaders value education and expect them to step up and meet international standards. And that message is reinforced by visible investments in new universities like ours, and in the appointment of highly educated, effectively networked leaders to government agencies and at the helm of private enterprises that also receive significant public investments. These are highly successful young leaders now. Also, the rulers of these countries see educational investment as critical to a future beyond oil. This is why they're doing it. I will quote just one statement by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who leads the country's knowledge transformation. What he said in a major international and domestic address in 2015 could not be more explicit. He began as follows. Our best bet in this period of time where we have wealth is to invest all our resources in education, because there will be a time 50 years from now when we load the last barrel of oil aboard the ship. The question is, 50 years from now, after we have loaded this last barrel of oil, are we going to feel sad? If our investment today is right, dear brothers and dear sisters, I think we will celebrate that moment. And the country has not let up on that agenda, I'm happy to say. An important and evolving accomplishment in the Gulf is diversification of the system of higher education. Higher education serves many different needs for individuals and countries, and they can be met in different ways. Not every university should do the same thing. The most efficient systems of higher ed are matrices of different types of institutions that allow students to match their interests to the education on offer. The gold standard for this approach is still the California Master Plan of 1960, about which I can say more, but I want to move on so I don't take too much time. It isn't perfect, but it continues to deliver a pretty amazing workforce and offer opportunity to millions of students every year in California. But this kind of idea, this tertiary education matrix of different types of institutions in the Gulf, is becoming such a diverse constellation. Public and private, national and international, vocational, as well as oriented to the liberal arts and driven by research. Universities from the US, Europe, Australia, and Asia have established campuses or specific programs in the country and on the peninsula. Some primarily serve local students, others tilt more towards expatriates, and many are a blend. In addition to developing a well-educated local population in this way, the UAE and Saudi Arabia have become exporters of higher education very quickly, attracting tens of thousands of students per year from India, Jordan, Oman, Egypt, Pakistan, and other countries in the MENA region, and especially East Africa. MEI Abu Dhabi and KAUST, for example, were designed to attract top students from all continents and bring them together with local talent for that exposure and networking that we heard about. So internationally grounded universities are enriching the knowledge ecosystem in this way. With more than 40% of our graduates from MEI Abu Dhabi, from all these countries, staying in the UAE to contribute to its evolving knowledge economy and to social and environmental sustainability. And the UAE has made it more attractive, to Professor Schmidt's point, for scientists and scholars to build their careers here with 10-year visas, and now a path, even a path to UAE citizenship for holders of doctorates and others. There are still gaps for higher education in the UAE, and I can just indicate what they are: gender, PhD production, and optimal use of technology. For example, the success of Emirati women in higher education is not fully matched by the attainment of men. So incentives and disincentives for men to go to university, and especially to get more than a basic 2-year sort of credential, that really needs to be stepped up. Here's a very important thing where I think is a second point and gap where I think there's a lot to be learned from the Asian success story. Across the Gulf, few citizens pursue or obtain PhDs, very few. The international character of our campuses, of course, has propelled the success of some outstanding universities, but it is now very important for countries in the Arab world to encourage more of their citizens to pursue the PhD and imagine a career as a professor and a top-line researcher in their countries. Too many local students are never taught by a professor from their own countries or even region. And the Gulf can learn a lot from the Asian experiment, I think. The last gap is now being closed, and that's my last point, the optimal use of technology and mobile learning platforms to deliver high quality education across our regions and the world, frankly. Such optimization would offer more flexible educational options. That is what we hear, what our students want, right? To students who would not otherwise have access to education at all, higher education. And to students who need their studies to be less place-bound, less height-bound. And so we have an opportunity now to use what we are learning during the pandemic about high-quality remote education. Our online pivot for all our institutions last year may not have been perfect, we know it wasn't, but as an international higher education community, we were able to do it. So we should apply what we know now about mixed or blended models of learning to meet students when and where they are. We are entering a world in which new players like Google and Amazon will expand the educational offer without university credentials, with shorter credit programs, and in which demand for higher education will continue to grow. Making sure students can navigate and keep a record of their journeys through this learning landscape is the responsibility of all of us in higher education. There is an opportunity to do what no country has quite managed yet. Create a viable digital passport or wallet that allows you to retain and carry every bit of education that you got in your life somewhere in an easily verifiable way. This passport would allow universities and employers to see at one click your path from preschool through high school and the world of higher learning. A comprehensive learning record is another way to call it. A comprehensive learner record like that could connect its owner. Also, it has a benefit for the owner because it can connect the owner to just-in-time opportunities for further courses and learning and skilling as life goes on. And I think really that with the nimbleness of apps and the sophistication of blockchain verification growing rapidly, this achievement is now within reach.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Westerman. I think you have given us very interesting insights into higher education in the Middle East, particularly in the UAE. And you mentioned a few key interesting features like the disproportionate success of women compared with men. And you also highlighted, I'm sure you have more to say, regards to the gaps in terms of gender, in terms of PhD production, and also in terms of technology. I'm also very much inspired by the quote by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. It's fantastic. And congratulations, I think, for the strategic sort of a role that the NYU Abu Dhabi is playing in the ecosystem, in the higher education ecosystem in the UAE. Thank you very much again. And I think we look forward to some of your responses to the questions later. Finally, I'd like to invite Mr. Siogo Katsu, my good friend, president of Nazarbayev University, to give his opening remarks. Shigo, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. And I hope you can hear me. Thank you, President Tang. Good to be here. And greetings from not so warm Central Asia. Indeed, actually, in Nur Sultan City, we are at minus 25 or so. If you add a wind chill factor, it's about minus 50 or so, I'm told. So just as a reminder that not all of Asia is always in a sunny, warm climate. But we heard already a little bit from Professor Guido, how the Polytechnic of Turin is engaging in Tashkent, our neighbor here. I really enjoyed all the talks, the presentations that I have listened to. Many of them, most of it obviously resonates with me. I was thinking about how I can try to contribute and make it most sort of also enjoyable for the audience. So I had some of my ideas about post-pandemic higher education development, but those I leave. But I think Professor Westerman has laid many of them out already. Let me therefore talk about a little bit about Kazakhstan's background and how Kazakhstan approached education, but also areas of really, in particular in higher education, collaboration opportunities between Asia and the Middle East, and why Asia is such an, in my view, also attractive destination, in addition to what Professor Schmidt already mentioned. And maybe last a few words about my own institution, Nazarbayev University, because it is another interesting case study, similar to, but also quite distinct from that of NYU AD that we just listened to. So first, about Kazakhstan and its approach to human capital development. As you know, modern Kazakhstan became independent this year, 30 years ago, so end of 1991. The founder, President Nazarbayev, always felt that with the overall loss of all subsidies coming from the center, meaning Moscow, overnight, the way forward was to invest in human capital. And while, of course, the Caspian, the rich oil resources were known, there was neither technology nor the finance at the time to exploit them. So he immediately, therefore, upon independence, turned also to the Western enterprises companies in order to unlock those resources. But it took about 10 years. So in the meantime, he already invested massively in education, in particular higher education. Why? Because, and this was actually quite opposed by many of even his colleagues, because he said, we decided to move from plan to market, but who's going to run our market economy? We need many young future leaders who are going to be well trained. So that's how it often started. But of course, the advantage in a way of the former Soviet Union system was that general educational levels were already very high to start with. And however, obviously, the content of the education and the institutions themselves were not really suited for market economy and modern management. So that drove the multifaceted education reforms that we saw since, going from primary to tertiary education, and a healthy dose of experimentation took place. New universities were created, new models were tested out, and my own institution, Nazarbayev University, but also our sister organization, which is called the Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools, were some of the outliers in terms of experimentation. Why? Because we also were given a particular legal framework under which we could operate, and I will get back to that a little bit later. At the same time, the research dimension fared rather badly during the first decades of independence, partly because the resources were not there, but also because of the legacy institutions involved at the time. Now, what are, before I get to my own institution, some of the areas that I really think, and I'm sure yesterday and the day before, a lot of discussion must have taken place in terms of areas, general areas of collaboration in the economic sphere, from food security, medical tourism, pharmaceutical research, engineering in particular, material sciences, and so, and of course now digital sciences as well. But when it comes to higher education collaboration, maybe I should start off. There are great opportunities. I will get back to that. But maybe one should start at the relatively prudent, I should not say prudent, but sort of realistic level, starting with student exchanges and gradually building up student exchanges, faculty exchanges, and then building up these exchanges. Why? Because of the country specifics and simply the fact that we have seen in the past some experiences where, because the detail is always in the devil is always in the detail, payments and other systems were very, very complicated. But also MENA, or Middle East North African institutions, and Asian higher education institutions don't know each other very well. So, we need to all experience a little bit more, understand each other's basic orientation level standards, and so that we can start to see eye to eye. In my case, or in our institution, we're a little bit privileged in terms of having our founders, and for instance, the Abu Dhabi side's Crown Prince being actually quite close. So there's actually a lot of exchange happening there. But having said that, the future, I think, looks very bright for academic exchange and developing our collaboration. And as we've heard, the Asian higher education system and its rapid growth reflects obviously the overall emergence of Asia as a growth pole. Indeed, people talk about the Asian century and so on. I think some of the key elements that maybe we can say distinguish overall Asian universities or the environment is there is a lot of pragmatism also on the government side when receiving international students, and we heard already from Singapore. So the sort of pragmatism, lower levels of bureaucracy first. Then obviously the availability already of top-notch researchers and faculty, and the growing number of research universities in a large number of countries. Again, also the pragmatism when it comes to research itself. Look for pragmatic solutions, applied research solutions, be it water, health, food security, and so on. Things that really have a societal benefit and spillover. Not to be underestimated, very importantly, merit-based admission and progression systems are in place in many places. Tuition levels obviously are much more affordable compared with the US, for instance. And there are ample opportunities, therefore, to advance students' global vision. And that is also further underpinned by ample government support for research and the availability of multitudes of financing schemes. Also, increasingly, we see in many universities the active participation of undergraduates in research, as well as opportunities for publication. And not to be left behind by Professor Guido's excellent presentation, I think the collaboration between government, industry, and private sector and universities is also rapidly developing there. Faculty is very much, in many places, internationalized, as well as students, but in some cases also even university administration. And sort of mirroring a little bit the industrial supply chain, actually often overlooked. There is also an efficient supply chain for research equipment and then materials. So all of these are actually, in my view, very attractive elements that Asia can maybe bring to the table. And in particular, when it comes to, I go back to the point of get to know each other, the associations such as the Asian Universities Alliances offer now very promising venues for regional, inter-regional cooperation. And I must say that the early, it's a young organization, but the early experience of collaboration has been very, very positive. Now, let me just add also a few words so that probably most of you are not familiar with this, with our institution. In a way, it is the whole objective or initial impetus was to help through this creation of an out-of-the-box university to push towards a modernization of the mindset, in particular among the young people. So our university opened 10 years ago. This June it will be 11 years ago. And, you know, when we were created, they also gave us a huge gift in terms of the authorities, in terms of establishing a bespoke law that for the first time in post-Soviet space put academic freedom and institutional autonomy into a legal context, so legally enshrined. And therefore we were by law outside of the normal higher education system, but we were expected to, you know, develop a new working model, a new paradigm for higher education institutions from outside the system in order to push the whole education system towards reforms. And in doing so, also government provided us ample financial resources, which we have been using to build a state-of-the-art campus, laboratories, and so on, but also have been generously funding our students. And the building blocks, I would say, are therefore the aforementioned academic freedom and institutional autonomy, of course, accountability, number one. Number two, everything is based on merit, admissions and progressions. Three, therefore, academic integrity and transparency has been a point that we've emphasized from the very beginning, also because we want to be a good research university. Professor Schmidt mentioned English as maybe as an advantage, so we also use English as a language of instruction. We are integrating teaching and research from our undergraduate students onwards. We have entered into strategic partnerships with top international universities, so each of our schools has a different partner. Complicated a little bit the management, but actually we've learned a lot. And we've tried to translate our values into graduate attributes, because part of our obviously mandate has been to develop future leaders. And today we've become a national brand. And in a way, I think our value has been that we were able to show, especially the skeptic younger generation, that there can be a different type of higher education institution here in the country. And now we are now moving and investing heavily in research innovation. We know that our students are bright. About 4 in 10 of our undergraduates move on to graduate studies, and half of them are getting their degrees, advanced degrees abroad, most of them on scholarships from their respective institutions. We have now ambitious plans for the second decade, focusing in particular on research and innovation. A lot of it is expected from us, and I took some hints from Polytechnic Turin in terms of creating this knowledge and innovation community, making it a citywide endeavor. So it's something that we will certainly continue to discuss also here. And in order to get us ready for the second decade, we've already, after 10 years, we scrapped most of our systems, and we also took an overhaul of our academic programs in order to get ready. So we have common core curricula, etc., etc. and we are open always for collaboration. So with this, let me conclude. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Shivyo. I have the privilege of visiting your very young university, Mariette University. You have a very impressive setup, and you have articulated the opportunities for global collaborations. And I think your university is really an example of all the good things that you have mentioned about pragmatism by the government, lower levels of bureaucracy, pragmatic approach towards research, a merit-based system, affordable fees, and leveraging on many other platforms like the AUA, the Asian University Alliance, for example. So thank you very much for your sharing. Can I invite all our panel members to turn on their camera and also their microphones? We would actually move direct to the Q&A session. We have, in fact, less than 10 minutes for Q&A, and there are actually 7 questions in the Q&A. So I would like to suggest that we move quite quickly, and I would like to invite panel members, perhaps 1 or 2 of them, to just answer these questions. Let me start with the first question. I think Ambassador Kasim's question has been from Bahraini. He had actually posted this question very early on. So question is, how can we close the gap between education and training and the need of the market when the 2 regions collaborate? Thank you. Who would like to take this? Yes, Brian, please.
So I do think your students, especially if have skin in the game, so they're having to pay, it's not entirely done off government money, the market will kind of find the right thing. So, many people may find that it's better to get training at any given time. One of the things where I think there might be market failure is, and I've had this discussion in Singapore actually, with the minister, the previous minister actually, is that education takes lots of time, right? You're setting down neural pathways, and this is a bit controversial, so there'll be people who can argue against it, but it would appear that education takes thousands of hours, and people seem to be able to do it more easily when they're young. Training is the thing you can keep doing on in life, and you can add on education. But in the same way, it's much easier to learn a language when you're 6, a new language when you're 6 than when you're 60. I think education and training have a similar bit. So you really do want to get the education, I think, down as a foundation. But the market is going to be pretty good at people choosing, I think, what's best for them if there is a broad range of things available. The main problem where things fail is people just literally don't have the options. So I would use a market solution as best I can with a lot of equality.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. I fully agree with you. I think the market actually, by its brutalness, will determine which are the ones that work and which are the ones that don't work. And I think that it's a clear telltale sign. Any of the panel members would like to add? If not, let's move on to, in fact, this is a question for Professor Asaraku. May you please elaborate more about your strategic plan on creating technological humanists involving the faculties of engineering and social sciences? In this program, did you also open new tenured positions for faculties from disciplines of humanities? Maybe we can just stop here and then have Professor Asaraku to elaborate. Thanks.
Yes, indeed. We have launched new positions in philosophy, ethics, sociology, history, in order to create a center for human studies for technologists that is going to help us both in the establishing research trajectories, but also, as I mentioned before, in helping us in giving our engineers these views and these enrichments. You have to become ethical in being an engineer, have social responsibility in what you do, predict the consequences. And that is being done with reference. We have been traveling around in Europe to some early examples developed at the PFL in Lausanne, at the École Centrale de Paris, and we are doing something in collaboration also with the Imperial College in London in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's also the other parts of the question on whether other institutions or universities, their involvement in this project, and whether you are inspired by some international model. Thank you.
Yes, we draw from the PFL, for instance, one model in the bachelor, the grandi sfide, we call them big challenges, where we have these two mentors, one technological mentor and one humanistic mentor that help interdisciplinary teams of students to elaborate ideas on how to solve these big challenges for humanity. This is a model that we have been drawing from EPFL, but there is nothing similar in Italy at the bachelor level. So we are sort of icebreaker in this area for our country, and we are proud to be so.
Yeah, thank you. This again, it's an illustration of my earlier point that a lot of us actually learn from the best practices, but you can't automatically carry it and copy it in your own context. So you need to localize it to make sure that it works in our system. Thank you. Let me move on to the third question. This is by Anthony Teo, who is a board member of our Middle East Institute. He has a comment and a question. His comment is this: Albert Einstein, 4 years after Spanish flu, raised endowments for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and also inadvertently for the precursor of NUS. Both are now leading universities in West and East Asia today. Now his question, in a post-COVID climate, could you suggest new formal operating exchange platforms and key strategies for the new normal? I think this is a very open question. I'll invite panel members to just provide your views. Thanks.
Well, let me suggest something. I think there are many ways of answering the question, and I appreciate it. I think it is an extremely perceptive comment, to be sure. Such an incredible once-in-a-century event, may it be once in a century and no more, of course, forces us to think about the post-COVID world. COVID may not go entirely away, but it will be in the rearview mirror in terms of its intensity. And so what do we do then? And I really think we need new kinds of flexibility. It's harder for me to imagine Einstein's solution that was so successful, obviously, for these universities 100 years ago, working today. I think the name of the game is partnerships, international solidarity. We've seen that actually the development of the vaccines required the release of the scientific information and the release of typical obstacles to collaboration in terms of IP policies and so forth. And I think if we're going to make progress on these planetary challenges, whether it is a pandemic or climate change, or migration flows, or any of these very pressing issues that have not gone away, we need to pull together. And again, I think technology will be our friend in this. We have seen how it was our friend helping us do this kind of conference, in fact, which is great. I might not have been able to come if it had been in Singapore. And that's true maybe for several of us. So I think pulling together and thinking then what really these exchange platforms are, what needs to be done in person, what can be just as well done, or at least in preparation or in between, through online platforms. That is one of these areas of innovation I would be really interested in talking about with, in fact, with many of the colleagues on this panel here, none of whom I've met before.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I can share my experience too, based on what happened at NUS. I was provost, and it's been one of my dreams to have a virtual exam, right? And I was nudging my faculty members to say, oh, let's have 20%, 30% of our courses on virtual exams. And that took a long time, 10 years. And then came COVID. You have no choice. Every exam has to be virtual. But I must commend my faculty members. They are resilient, and they did it, all right? And quite creative in how actually this is done. And I think this is replicated everywhere else, not just NUS. I think every university, we have no choice but to just go virtual. Likewise, I think the second example is one on research. Right. We are so accustomed to, say, traveling, to meeting people, to interacting and engaging with them, which is good. All right. But as what Professor Westerman said, that's the previous pre-COVID type of mindset. And COVID basically, well, it stops travel. And yet, COVID-19, it's a very interesting and challenging scientific problem. Excellent challenge. And what do you see? Actually, our researchers becoming more actually connected. And again, COVID actually pushes all of us to think of something. So that resilience amongst our researchers, it's, I think, commendable. They actually do more research, and the exchange was much, much faster. And in fact, a lot of this discoveries to mitigate COVID-19 would not have been possible if the entire global research community had not actually worked and closed ranks together. Thank you. Okay, perhaps we can move on to the next question. The next question is actually addressed to Prof. Westerman. It comes from Mr. Ong Pao Xuan. Now, his question is this: specific to the Middle East, will more women-only colleges help forward women equity in society? Personally, my preference is for co-ed tertiary education. However, looking at historically women liberal arts colleges in the US and Japan, I feel that their graduates tend to be the most forward-looking women leaders in their respective country, and they have accelerated gender equity in whichever field of study they endeavor in. Is there any relevance in this observation to the Middle East region today?
Thank you very much, Ong Pao, for the question. I think the answer is yes. And yes, women-only colleges have already helped for improve equity for women and participation in society for women, certainly across the Arab Peninsula. Certainly some of the developments in Saudi that we've seen with women being able to participate in certain ways, it's stop and start, it's not perfect, but a lot of those women did come through women-only colleges, which is their only option there. The UAE has been a little different. They have really advocated female leadership. The Parliament of the Federal National Council here is 50% women, 50% men by design, and our own campuses integrated and so forth. There is a wide range of possibilities, and I would say it's not one size fits all. Some women in the United States benefited from the single gender college experience. Some women would not flourish in that environment. I myself would not prefer it. But so I think it is a little bit meeting students where they are, meeting families where they are. Families have a large influence here on how people think about their education. It's a very familial society. And I think you're going to continue to see the development of both. Very interestingly, the national universities here, some of the federal universities here, have begun to have at least a lot of shared campus facilities and are beginning to move towards a more integrated classroom and lab, because, as the leadership here also says, the minute they go into the workforce, and there are many women across the workforce here now, the minute that happens, of course, they have to have been used to that kind of environment. So I think there's a lot of change, but I think for a while for a good while, there will continue to be an important role for single-sex education here as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Would you also perhaps, as a follow-up, in the STEM area, I think this is a perennial problem, especially in Singapore. We're trying to attract more graduates in the STEM majors or disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And it's actually quite a formidable challenge.
Yes, I'm sorry to be speaking so much, and we'll move on to others, I'm sure. And there are distinguished scientists on this panel, which I am not, although I, of course, follow science extremely avidly. And I would say that here too, pipeline development is incredibly important. That is where it actually is important. Contrary to what I said before, don't foreclose opportunity for people. The truth is, in high school for women, obviously science, math seems a little nerdy. They feel like they shouldn't be in it. There's a lot of bias against women in science, or historically in the school system. But then once they get to college, often they are not fully prepared in math to succeed. So I think there's a lot that can be done by putting up role models and encouraging organizations like Women Who Code and things like that. There are Girls Who Code. There are new enterprises like that around the world, including one started by 2 graduates of NUS Abu Dhabi. And then once you're in the university, again, signaling how important it is, because you're right, the application pools aren't quite there yet, but they are rapidly changing. They are rapidly diversifying. And so you have to work at it from both ends. The supply, the encouragement of women through all sorts of programs, and we do this extremely actively through student and faculty organizations, but at the same time, constantly educating search committees to look in a broad way and to not imagine only the people they saw in front of them when they were students in the classroom, who would have been, of course, preponderantly male. So I think you need to look at it from the top and from the bottom and try to develop that pipeline, but then also make the current cohort of faculty who are doing the hiring receptive to that project.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Westerman. And I know, Brian, you would like to add?
Yeah, just to double down on what she said. It really is a top-bottom type thing, and you can make some decisions from the top. You can. It's a big world out there, and there are a lot of women in STEM around the world, and so you can create role models, and you can create a community that doesn't look like an alien beast to a young woman. So, well, you know what I mean. Come to my physics department and you'll understand. And so I think you do need to do some of that top stuff, but then you do need to also work and get the pipeline going through. And so there is a role for leadership in creating an environment that doesn't look hostile to young women, and that's a really important part of it.
Thank you. I think this is very much work in progress. I think we'll keep pressing on, especially with your suggestions. I'd like to pose a question to Professor Babut and also a question to Mr. Katsu. So if I may, Professor Babut, given your unique vantage point of having been an educator and a researcher in the Middle East and also in East Asia, I would like to ask, what are some of the features that Middle East institutions can try to emulate or even try to sort of bring into their Middle East ecosystem? Over to you, thanks.
Thank you, Professor Tan. That's a very pertinent question. And I think there are a lot of lessons that Middle Eastern Educational Institute could learn from the Asian educational experience and the success that they have achieved. In this sense, I think one of the most important things is the ethics of education. And when I say that, I want to go back and refer to what I said earlier about the culture. I think the culture is extremely important. And I agree with Professor Westerman that, you know, there has been a lot of spending from the government and attention to education. There is no lack of that. Question is, why haven't they succeeded in the way that East Asian countries' educational system and also economic development at large have succeeded? And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier. The idea of education has to change, and it is changing now because of the pressure of the post-oil economy, the pressure from the top as well, and the direction from the top, but also because of, you know, the post-COVID or the COVID impact on the economy, on the education system, etc. So I think, you know, the work ethics, whether it is in education or whether it's in the workplace, is extremely important. That is something that we do lack here in the Middle East. I come from the Middle East. I'm the only person here in the panel from the region, so I can maybe be a little bit critical of our system, and I can see the other empty side of the glass, if you like. I think, as I said, the educational system was built not to produce knowledge in the first place. It was built to produce civil servants. And that is changing, obviously. And there are very good examples of that in UAE, etc. There are also, there are some very good examples of Gulf students who went to top international universities. And they came back to work in their own environment and so on. Saudi Arabia is the largest country, for example, with PhD holders in the Middle East. You know, because of King Abdullah's generous funding for scholarship abroad, there are so many Saudis with their PhDs, but coming back to an environment that does not really help them to integrate or to produce or to be able to contribute to their society. Obviously, things are changing now, but I'm talking about, you know, the recent past. I think besides you know, learning from the ethics and the work ethics and the values that East Asia is having, I think building professional universities built on meritocracy is very important. Not just, you know, putting a royal family member as the head of the university or close to that, but also or someone, you know, from the top families or well-known tribes, but you know, making sure that people with talent can actually have space and be able to contribute. I think also, to a certain extent, academic freedom. Academic freedom is very, very important. Cannot achieve the level of, you know, integrity and so on if you do not have academic freedom. To a certain extent, this is lacking in some of our space. I think academic cooperation between universities in the region is extremely important. The GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, was kind of built to integrate the economies, the societies, the politics, and so on. But in terms of really helping these universities and educational institutions to work together and to collaborate between themselves and also with the international partners is lacking. We are spending a lot of money in education. It's one of the highest in the government budgets. We are also importing or inviting and partnering with international universities like Asia is doing as well. And there are some top universities that came from all over the world and established branches here. But the question is, why haven't we been able to succeed? the way that Asia has succeeded. And I think there are some fundamental issues that we need to tackle, and we're going to be brutal about them, because if we don't tackle them on, we're not going to change, and we're just going to, masquerade over and promote what the government is doing without actually saying, look, this is what you have to do. There is a fundamental change in philosophy that we need to do to education. It's not just what the leader says. It's what the society wants, what the society accepts as well, what the culture can accept and cannot. Can we also change that culture? It is doable. It's hard work, but it can be done. And I think we could use some of the tools like Islam, for example, that has been to a certain extent used wrongly to divert it towards more people who want to attain knowledge and leadership, and can produce beautiful or successful students. We need to tackle this gender issue, because that's a very, very important question. Why girls go to universities in the Middle East more than any other country in terms of percentages, because they want to get out from their homes. Of course, they want to get the education, they want to get certificate, etc. They want to get a job, but also because the house and the culture is so imprison them in their in their societies, and they see this as a way out. So that has to change as well. Of course, we need to also give them opportunity to work in the future, and equal opportunity with men. So there are a lot of things that you cannot just separate education from the society, from the culture, and of course from the economy. And maybe I've taken a long time to explain this, but thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Mahmood. I think you have actually given really deep insights into the challenges that Middle Eastern societies would face. And I think these are very important: work ethics, culture, how the system has been positioned, all right, and some of the features that would be required and important to build a successful higher education ecosystem. Thank you. I would like to direct a question from the Q&A to Sigio. It's by Elliot. His question is this: it seems to me that one of the reasons why Mr. Katsu's school worked is due to backing from governments and foreign financial institutions. However, what is to be done if there is no government incentive or wider society does not back tertiary education? Over to you, Shigyo.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Let me maybe just clarify, because I may not have been clear. There has been no foreign financial participation in our university. It's all homegrown funding. In that sense, obviously, it reflects the priority that the government, leadership, but also actually society gives to education. And education has always had a very high status in society. Even today, there are almost too many universities in the country. So there is a premium on, as we also heard before, on higher education. So I don't think that we need to worry about whether there is going to be support for education or not. Also, in terms of, because we are a very expensive operation, we have to admit. So therefore, early on, we established sort of a US endowment for the first time, I think, also in the region. In the former Soviet Union, we established a US-style endowment that we gradually built up. Why? Obviously, because we don't want to be dependent on government funding that much. So we are pushing sort of endowment, gradually tuition, as well as contract research to diversify our sources. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have still a couple of questions. This is a general question. Is there a risk of over-generating university graduates that will cause unrealistic expectations of graduates and society. It's open to the floor. So I talked about, yes, Silvio?
Yes, I think there certainly is an element of that. You know, Kazakhstan, with a population of about 19 million people, has more than 120 higher education institutions. And of them, maybe 50 or 60 are private institutions, for profit. And many of them are of, let's say, dubious quality, and they've become degree printing machines. Just to give an example, illustration of, you know, higher education is valid, but anyway, to a degree that it's not very healthy. And the economy hasn't been able to really generate the jobs. And that's one of the challenges, especially for resource-dependent economies, where we have some similarities also with the Gulf. And one of the key challenges for the country is how do we effectively implement the transition away from resources to a much more knowledge-based economy, which will at the same time also create high-quality jobs. That is really the challenge that we all have to face.
Thank you. And I understand that Professor Asaraku, you also would like to contribute?
Yes, I remind you what I said. For Italy, as a lack of graduates in the professional sector. So specialized technicians that are not engineers, but are trained to operate on Industry 4.0 and digitalization of production plants and so on. So we are pushing this part that is quite developed in Germany, for instance, but much less in our country. And indeed, you don't need only engineers or fully graduate, but you need to a wide span of professional. And in any case, you have to change in any stage of education the paradigm now. So it's a quite exciting moment where we are cooperating with primary and secondary schools as well to share laboratories, to bring ideas and mix up a bit the classrooms. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. My contribution will be like, I think there has to be a sort of a good calibration on jobs that are sort of calibrated to the graduates and the number of graduates that a society produces. You don't want a situation where you don't have enough jobs and you have too many graduates, then you have an issue of underemployment or unemployment. So that can happen, especially when you have too many universities that produces too many graduates. So there's a mismatch in terms of the expectations. Professor Babu, I think would you like to contribute to?
If I may, Professor Tan, and that is, I come from one of, as you know, one of the Gulf regional countries, and we are currently facing an economic challenge and also an unemployment challenge, as you mentioned, and underemployment. And that is because of course, the slowdown in the economy, the effect of, the low oil prices, the COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. But the unemployment, the largest part of that is within the graduates. And that is interesting. So we have many graduates with different backgrounds, whether they're educated locally, regionally, or internationally, some of them with top universities degrees, and others are not as good, but still graduate with their degrees, and they cannot find a job. And one of the reasons is, of course, the slowdown in the economy and the lack of opportunities, but also the culture that people can not take other jobs apart from what their parents have used to. So they want a government job, but they want an office, and they want all the facilities that used to be in the past, which has changed, and it's not going to come back. but they still want to do that, and they're willing to stay at home waiting for that moment to come until the job comes. And this is what I was trying to refer to as the culture that needs to change. University degree does not necessarily necessitate that you're going to get the job you want. And you got to equip yourself with skills and reskill yourself and adapt to different environment and different economic cycles. But this is not happening. And because of that, not only in Oman, but also across the Gulf states, especially the large countries like Saudi Arabia are suffering. Lots of graduates now without jobs. And this is a really serious problem. So it's not just getting university education. It's also what can you do with it in the future, and what has it prepared you to? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I have one last question on the Q&A that was addressed to me about meritocracy as a basis of education in Singapore. And in Japan, meritocracy is regarded almost equal to elitism, and it's not appreciated. So the question is, how does Singapore assure fairness of meritocracy and convince ordinary citizens to accept it? Singapore is still a very young nation, and meritocracy has always been a key principle in determining how you get access to education, especially to higher education. So in Singapore, only 40% of each birth cohort gets subsidized education in our 6 universities. So this is a number which we call the cohort participation rate. Now, of course, of late, there has been unhappiness, especially, it is based on just what the former DPM, Tharman, calls it academic meritocracy, how well you do in exams, all right? And so there's increasing concerns that this is not providing equal access to citizens. And the government, I think, is very mindful of these concerns, and the framework has also been tweaked. So one of the critical exams, for instance, is the primary 6 exam. All right, that's equivalent to grade 6 before you go into secondary school, a very important exam. They are going to de-emphasize that exam, right? And it is in the process of being done. And I think in another 2 years or so, this will be completed. And at the top schools, right, there is always a discretionary admission that allows students to get in, not based on their academic results, but based on different attributes. Likewise, in the universities, we have attribute-based admission, which forms about 30% of our admission. So if we have 100 places, 30% of the places should not be based on results. It should be based on attribute-based. Having said that, I think it is something quite challenging. Meritocracy had worked in Singapore, but it's less effective now, right? Because we have reached a certain level of growth in the country, and we have to constantly tweak the system. All right. I have more to share, but I know that time is a constraint. Can I quickly invite each of our panel members just a 1 minute roundup? All right, and starting with Professor Mahmood. Just a 1 minute roundup. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Tan, and I thank my co-panelists. I learned a great deal from them, and thank MEI. I miss being with them, miss being in Singapore. I think there is a lot to learn from Singaporean experience and also other Asian experiences in our region. There are a lot of best practices that we can learn and we can adapt to suit the local environment. It's not just because of lack of funding, or it's not because of intentions. There are something missing that we need to tackle. And I think, governments have spent a lot on education. Maybe they could spend more on research, which is an area that they haven't been able to do, obviously with some variation between different countries. But without education, without equipping the people, the young people with the best degrees and best practices and ethics, that they can go to the labor market, we're going to face this problem. And yet, we're wealthy countries in one way, but we are now suffering unemployment. And one reason of that, despite the fact we have a lot of foreign labor, and that is because we have a mismatch between what we teach and what we produce in terms of graduates, and also what the market needs. So there is a lot of rethinking that needs to be done, and I think this panel has been great in addressing some of that. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Professor Smith.
Thank you. I think that global education, as I indicated, I think has almost only upsides. And although people can get cranky if they, as graduates, don't get jobs, you really need to look at what the average outcomes are. And certainly in most countries, education almost never holds you back. At best, it's break even. So I think that it's sort of a win no matter what you do in this. You can be smart about it, but I think it is something that will serve any country well, and it has all sorts of ancillary benefits, better health, more social cohesion, and everything that goes around that. So it's a pretty smart thing to do.
Thank you so much. Professor Asaraku?
Yes, it was a pleasure. I'm looking forward to establish connection with Shigeo, since we are almost neighbors. And I hope that someone else is going to have a similar, let's say, experience with the humanities to share good practices, because we all have to get out of our comfort zone and abandon, not completely, but abandon the education paradigms that we've been following for 160 years, that were tailored to the Industrial Revolution, that were linear, deductive. Now we have to be divergent, creative, human technologist and technological humanist, something that is very exciting. I am engaged fully in this, and it changed my life. I am reading books on sociology, and this is fun for me as a chemical engineer. Thank you very much. It was great. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Professor Westerman?
Yes, I too want to thank everyone on the panel for this great set of conversations, and also all the questions from the audience. Super engagement. Thank you. I would love to have another session with all of you about the continuing evolution of these regions we're talking about as producers of knowledge, as generators of research. And I hope we would talk about them as not doing that without thinking of Africa, without thinking of Latin America, North America, Asian Pacific, and so forth. We need to pull together. And I think one thing I would say about research is that it is important to think of the knowledge that universities produce as universal in reach. It's in our name, universal. And although the temptation will be to stay laser focused, as our governments want us to be, right, on science, technology, invention, and AI, I think the frontiers of these disciplines can only be pushed safely when they are well governed by ethics, by social thought and policy, and also developed, as Professor Gildo has said so well, in consort with the humanities and the arts that make human life so rich. Of course, I'm an art historian, so I'm biased in this way, but I would say this specifically. What the humanities and the arts are really good at is keeping individual humans and their cultures in view, telling their stories and drawing on the history that they bring and what we can learn from that, and helping us imagine futures in a human sense. So that's what I would say, and we don't have to do it all alone. The research we are going to need and that can be delivered and that we need for the planet, really, it can only be done if as knowledge institutions, we pull together across borders, even as many governments try to close them.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you, Professor Westerman. Very beautifully put. Thank you. Shigeo, my good friend, please, over to you.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you to NUS, MEI for inviting us all. I've learned a tremendous amount. And I must say that I don't have much to add to what all the other panelists, co-panelists already advanced. I can only agree with all of them. Just let me add that, you know, it's great technology at work. It's through digital advancement, maybe through COVID, that you have been able to bring us all together. And I certainly hope that, you know, discovering others hopefully will lead to new partnerships. And that's what universities are there for. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I echo you. I think it's mainly because of COVID that we need to have this virtual conference. And I think it's really our honor and privilege to be able to have 5 so distinguished members of the panel. So thank you very much for sharing your gems. I have learned a lot. And I guess our final message to our friends in the Middle East is that you can look east, right? I think there are many things that you can look at, and you know, we look forward to collaborating with all of you. And thank you again, panel members, as well as participants, for your great questions. Thank you. And over to you, Michelle.
Thank you very much to everyone. Let me just wrap up, because we've had 3 days of really interesting and excellent discussions. And when we started looking at trade, we went on to look at technology. And today we looked at, while we looked at education, I would say that it was really part of a broader look at how we develop our human capital, you know. So if I look at all this, I've asked myself, where do we go from here? Right. We've seen actually that there is much more that countries in the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East can do together as our 2 regions respond to a rapidly changing world, and as we continue to grapple with COVID-19. As our Minister Vivian Balakrishnan pointed out in his speech, COVID-19 isn't all bad news, and I think it's something that we can all agree on. The silver lining is that the global response proves that coming together with a common goal does work. The areas of trade, technology, education, they offer ample opportunities for both regions to increase cooperation. But I think we must also bear in mind that you can't decouple geopolitics from these issues. I mean, that was something that came up several times across various panels. How countries in both regions deal with domestic imperatives will have implications for foreign policies. And I think, Abdullah, you talked a little bit about that when you talked about, you know, education is one thing, but then how does the infrastructure deal with this? How do you create the spaces, you know? You can't not have education. You must develop your human capital, you know? And I think all this will have implications. Governance has not only become more complicated at the international level, but also at the national level, where in some cases it's also become less effective. I think in the Middle East, you see that many Middle East countries could see greater internal turbulence as they navigate tricky economic and social transformations. Getting the domestic house in order, politics, economic, society, would be imperative for countries before they can engage with other countries meaningfully. Governments also have to ensure that any benefits that they develop reach as many people as possible, not just a select privileged few. This refers to the prosperity that trickles down to the societal level from increased trade and investment, but it also relates to the idea of digital inclusion and narrowing the digital divide. Let me talk a little bit about that, because I think, especially with COVID, and Prof. Tan, you talked about this, that COVID-19 accelerated the pace. Many of the things that we wanted to do virtual or digitally, online, you know, people would resist it because it wasn't the norm, right? But the norm has changed. COVID-19 changed many of these things, you know what I mean? And I think one of the things that I've concluded, and I think many of us have concluded through the 3 days, is that digitization is not just the realm of engineers, coders, etc. If you take a look at Israel, for example, you know, in order to factor in the human dimension, for example, of what they call smart cities, you know, or cities in the age of technology, there's a host of other disciplines that have to be involved. You know, so Professor Westerman, you talked about the arts, about the human side of it. I'm a graduate in English literature, so I completely understand that. You know, I come from the arts humanities side. You have to involve the other disciplines, because that's how you get that balance. So clearly the aim of digitization shouldn't just be about the technology. It really has to be about how we can improve the lives of our citizens, of people, you know. There are, of course, many, many areas of cooperation between Asia and the Middle East that can be exploited. I mean, this was the whole purpose of this year's annual conference, to look at the challenges and the opportunities for both our two parts of the world, the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East. So our Minister for Economics, Tan See Leng, actually noted when he spoke that there are burgeoning opportunities for Singapore as the disposable incomes and services sectors grow in Middle East countries. And many of our panelists noted that Singapore as a leading smart city, which I thank you for that, along with other Asian ones, because you do have to look at the others. There's Seoul, there's Shenzhen. You can pair with places like Dubai to collaborate, learn, roll out more such moves, right? Therefore, for us, this conference is only the start of what we at the Institute hope will be a year-long discussion. We will continue these conversations on all the important themes that have come up in this year's panel and conference, and we will continue these discussions through our events, our publications. Thank you all for your continued support, for the time that you have taken from busy schedules, and we invite you to walk with us virtually as we continue our work in this new normal. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle Teoh, for the closing remarks. May I now invite Professor Tan and all the panelists to join our Executive Director, Ms. Teoh, for our final photo session. If I could invite all of you to have your videos turned on for the screenshot, please. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Much appreciated.
We have now come to the end of the Middle East Institute's Annual Conference 2021. It has been 3 days of wonderful discussions and astute analysis on the themes of trade, technology, and human capital development. On behalf of all at MEI and our audience, I would like to thank the ministers and speakers alike for your efforts and participation. Before I close the session, I'd like to announce that we have an ongoing film festival running till the 3rd of March, featuring 6 films on an online platform named the Shaw Kino Lounge. The festival includes exclusive Q&A sessions with the directors of these films, and to sign up, please refer to the link in the Zoom chat box or visit the event section on our webpage. There is also a second link in the chat box if you'd like to sign up to our mailing list to be updated on future MEI events. The 2 links will be accessible 5 minutes for up to 5 minutes after the conclusion of this Zoom event. Once again, thank you everyone. Have a great week ahead, and we hope to see you again.